It was supposed to be a routine midnight flight, just another weary red-eye crossing the country. The cabin buzzed softly with the hum of engines and half-asleep passengers scrolling through phones, sipping cheap coffee, waiting to land and forget. But somewhere high above the Rockies, something shifted. The air grew colder, the lights dimmed, and whispers began to drift between the seats, voices that didn't belong to anyone living. Daniel Reed, an EMT running from his own ghosts, suddenly found himself sitting beside a woman clutching a child's photograph. A child who shouldn't exist anymore. As turbulence shook the plane, reality started to unravel, revealing that this flight carried more than the living. And before dawn, everyone aboard would learn the terrifying truth. Some journeys don't end at the destination. They circle forever between life and death, waiting for someone brave enough to help them finally go home. The flight from Los Angeles to Chicago was supposed to be simple, quiet, uneventful, forgettable. The kind of red-eye flight where passengers buried their faces in phones or slept through the turbulence. But that night, something about the air inside the cabin felt off. It was too cold, too still, as if the aircraft itself was holding its breath. Daniel Reed sat in seat 17B, staring blankly at the seatback screen that flickered between safety messages and static. He wasn't paying attention. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the same moment over and over. His mother's funeral, the final goodbye, the hollow sound of dirt falling against the coffin lid. He hadn't cried. He couldn't. Daniel had been an EMT for almost a decade, a man who'd seen death up close so many times it no longer shocked him. But grief was different. Grief lingered. It followed him like turbulence he couldn't escape. The seat beside him was empty when boarding began to slow. The flight attendants were checking the overhead bins when a soft, shaky voice broke through the hum of the engines. "Wait, please." A woman appeared at the entrance, clutching a wrinkled boarding pass and a small photograph. Her clothes looked a little too thin for the cold, her hair damp from the rain outside. The attendant guided her down the aisle gently. "You're in 17A, ma'am," the attendant said softly. Daniel shifted to give her space. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she buckled in. Up close, she looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen, her skin pale as if she hadn't slept in days. She turned the photo over in her hands, whispering to herself. Daniel, by instinct, offered a polite smile. "Rough night?" Her head tilted toward him and she whispered, voice fragile and uneven. "I need to get home before midnight." "He said he'll be waiting for me." Daniel hesitated. "Your son?" he asked gently. She nodded. "He hates the dark." Something about the way she said it made Daniel's stomach tighten. He looked down at the photo she held, and the world seemed to stop. The boy in the picture couldn't have been more than 8. Bright brown eyes, messy hair, a smile too big for his face. Daniel knew that face. He'd seen it before, years ago, in the flashing red lights of an ambulance, the twisted wreckage of a car accident on Highway 41. He'd been the first responder that night. The child hadn't made it. He blinked, his mouth going dry. "Ma'am, where—" The plane jerked forward as the engines roared. The flight attendant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." Daniel tried to focus. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he was just exhausted. But as the plane climbed into the storm-heavy sky, the woman pressed the photograph against her chest and whispered something over and over, almost like a prayer. "I promised him I'd be home. I promised." Daniel looked away, pretending to check his phone, but his reflection in the window caught something strange. Her hand wasn't reflected beside his. Only the photo was. The cabin lights dimmed. Thunder rolled outside like distant drums. Daniel closed his eyes, telling himself he was imagining it. The grief, the exhaustion, it was making him see things. But as the plane leveled and the seatbelt sign went off, he turned to glance at her again. She was staring directly at him now. Her eyes were full of tears. "Do you believe the dead can wait for us?" The engines groaned under the pressure of the wind. Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't know," he said softly. The woman smiled faintly, like she already knew the answer. And outside, lightning split the clouds in two, for just a second illuminating the reflection of a child's face in the airplane window. The storm outside had grown angrier. Lightning clawed across the clouds, white streaks flashing through the oval windows like the sky itself was trying to tear open. The cabin lights flickered each time thunder followed. brief bursts of brightness revealing faces twisted with exhaustion and anxiety. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers drumming against the armrest. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about the woman beside him. She hadn't moved since takeoff, just sat there with that torn photograph, whispering to herself in a voice too soft to make out. Every few seconds, she'd glance at her watch, eyes wide and restless. Midnight was still hours away, yet she acted like every passing minute mattered. Daniel leaned toward her slightly. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond. Just kept her eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her, her lips moving rapidly, murmuring a string of words that didn't sound like prayer, but more like bargaining. Then out of nowhere the plane dropped. Hard. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin as cups, phones, and headphones tumbled from tray tables. Someone screamed in the back. The overhead bins rattled violently. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We've hit a patch of turbulence." Daniel's heart thudded. He turned toward the woman. She was clutching the photo now, her knuckles white. Her seatbelt hung loose across her lap. "Ma'am, you need to buckle up," he said, reaching out instinctively. But when his hand brushed the fabric of her sleeve, it was cold, not cool, but freezing, like touching metal left outside in winter. She finally looked at him, eyes glistening.
"He said he'd wait for me," she whispered.
"He said the storm would bring me home." Before Daniel could reply, another jolt slammed the aircraft. The lights blinked, then went dark. For a full 3 seconds, the cabin was swallowed in blackness. Nothing but the engine's growl and the screams of frightened passengers. When the lights flickered back on, seat 17A was empty. Daniel froze. The seatbelt was still twisted open. The photograph, torn at the edges, lay on the cushion, damp as if someone had cried over it. He blinked, leaned forward, looked down the aisle. No sign of her. No one moving except a flight attendant securing a galley cart. He hit the call button. Within seconds, a flight attendant approached, a young woman with kind eyes but an edge of fatigue. "Sir, are you all right?" Daniel pointed at the seat. The woman who was sitting here, she just disappeared. She said she needed to get home. "You must have seen her board." The attendant frowned. "Sir, that seat's been empty this entire flight." Daniel's pulse spiked. "No, she sat right there. I talked to her. She had a photo." But the attendant cut him off gently. "Maybe you saw someone passing by before takeoff. I assure you no one is assigned to 17A tonight." Daniel looked down again. The photograph was still there. The boy's eyes staring up at him. Same child, same smile. He picked it up slowly, hands trembling. There were faint words scribbled on the back now, letters smeared as if written with a wet finger. He could barely make them out. "Find him." Before midnight, a low sound rose beneath the floorboards. Deep and rhythmic, the unmistakable vibration of landing gear shifting too early. The lights flickered again. From the corner of his eye, Daniel caught movement. The reflection in the airplane window, the woman's pale face staring at him from the glass, her lips moving silently as if trying to speak through it. Then came the faint sound of laughter, high-pitched, childlike, echoing from somewhere near the back of the cabin. The baby that had been crying earlier suddenly went silent. Every sound in the cabin died, and in the oppressive silence that followed, Daniel realized something chilling. The storm outside wasn't just turbulence, it was something calling them. The cabin had gone eerily quiet. Only the mechanical hum of the engines and the occasional crack of thunder filled the air. The seatbelt sign glowed a constant amber, casting a ghostly hue across the rows of uneasy passengers. Daniel sat stiff in his seat, staring at the empty space beside him, 17A. The photograph lay in his lap, and the words scribbled on the back echoed through his mind. Find him. Before midnight, but how? What did it mean? He rubbed his face with shaking hands. Maybe he was hallucinating. Grief, exhaustion, stress. They could explain the woman, the voice, the vanishing act. That's what he told himself over and over, until the captain's voice broke through the intercom, strained, static-ridden, and trembling. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're experiencing temporary system failure. The words made the hairs on Daniel's arms rise. Temporary system failure. The plane jolted hard. Not the small bump of turbulence, but a violent drop that made everyone gasp. Trays flew, cups shattered, someone screamed. The lights flickered wildly. Daniel's seatbelt cut into his shoulder as he gripped the armrest. Then, everything stopped, no movement, no sound. For a moment, Daniel thought the plane had stabilized, until he realized the opposite. The engines had gone silent. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was wrong. A heavy, suffocating quiet that made his heartbeat echo in his ears. He looked out the window. The storm clouds below were gone. Instead, he saw something impossible. The faint outlines of mountain peaks dusted with snow glowing under flashes of lightning. They were flying far too low. Panic clawed up his throat. "We're descending," he whispered. Across the aisle, a woman began to cry. Another passenger fumbled with a rosary. Somewhere behind him, a man muttered, "Why aren't the engines on?" Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. "Hey, it's okay," he said, trying to sound calm. "They'll restart the engines." But his voice was swallowed by the silence. As he turned toward the back of the plane, his breath caught. For a split second, during a flash of lightning, the cabin wasn't the same. The modern gray seats flickered into older ones, faded blue leather stained with smoke and time. The emergency signs read a different number, Flight 309. The people sitting there weren't his fellow passengers anymore. They were pale, motionless, their eyes hollow, faces bruised, some bloodied. An elderly man in a business suit stared blankly ahead, half his face burned. A woman clutched a rosary that had melted into her hand. Then the flash ended and everything looked normal again. The modern seats, the passengers, the crying. Daniel's knees nearly buckled. He turned to the nearest flight attendant. "What flight is this?" he demanded. She blinked, confused. "Sir?" "The number." "What's the flight number?" "Flight 310, she said, hesitant. Daniel's hand shook as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his crumpled boarding pass. The print flickered, Flight 310, and then, for a fraction of a second, the digits glitched into 309. His pulse roared in his ears. Flight 309. He remembered it now, a story he'd seen on the news as a child. A commercial flight from Denver to Chicago that vanished in a storm over the Rockies 20 years ago. No survivors, no wreckage ever found, and now, he was on it. The overhead lights began to dim again, flickering between decades, new and old, present and past, as if the plane itself couldn't decide what year it belonged to. Daniel stumbled toward the aisle, gripping the seats for balance. "We're not supposed to be here," he muttered. "We're not supposed to be alive." Somewhere deep in the cabin, a child's voice whispered through the dark. "He's waiting for her." Before midnight, Daniel's blood ran cold. Lightning flashed again, and this time the cockpit door was open. Inside, he saw the faint outlines of the pilots, frozen, their faces pale and still, eyes wide open as though staring at something he couldn't see. The intercom crackled once more. A man's distorted voice whispered, "Flight 309, requesting permission to land." Then, static, Daniel looked back toward his seat. The photograph was gone, and outside, through the window, the mountains were rising fast. The cabin was a nightmare of flickering lights and trembling metal. Every few seconds, the plane's interior shifted between two timelines, half real, half ghostly. In one blink, Daniel saw terrified passengers gripping their seats. In the next, burned faces and tattered clothing from decades past. The present and the past were colliding, trapped in the same cursed flight path. Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his chest as he moved down the aisle. The air was electric, thin, hard to breathe. Whispers floated around him, disjointed voices overlapping like static. "Tell them, we didn't mean to leave. Please, help us go home." He turned toward the sound. A young woman appeared briefly between the seats. The same pale woman from earlier, her face illuminated by flashes of lightning. She looked more peaceful now, but her eyes still begged for something. "You said he was waiting," Daniel whispered, trembling. "Your son, where is he?" Her expression softened. "Still on board," she said faintly, her voice echoing like it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "He never left." A chill ran through him. "The child?" "Seat 23, she murmured, and then she vanished. Daniel didn't think. He pushed through the trembling cabin, stumbling toward the back. Rows of passengers turned to look at him. Or rather, what looked like passengers. Their eyes were hollow, their outlines fading in and out like smoke. At row 23, an empty child's seat sat by the window. A small teddy bear rested there, its fur scorched, one eye missing. The air around it shimmered faintly. Daniel reached for it, hand shaking, and the plane lurched violently downward. Screams erupted. The overhead bins burst open, luggage tumbling through the aisle. A woman clutched her child. A man prayed loudly. Daniel grabbed the seat for balance. The teddy bear rolled onto the floor, stopping at his feet. He picked it up, and suddenly the lights cut out completely. Darkness. Total. Then a whisper right beside his ear. "Are we going home now?" Daniel turned slowly. There, standing in the aisle, was the boy from the photograph, the same one he'd tried to save years ago. The boy's clothes were slightly torn, his skin pale as paper, but his eyes glowed faintly with something gentle. Human. Daniel's throat closed. "You," the boy smiled weakly, "you tried to help me before." Lightning illuminated the cabin again, revealing the ghosts of Flight 309 surrounding them. Passengers frozen in silent sorrow. Daniel knelt to the boy's level. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he whispered. The boy tilted his head. "Mom said you'd take us home." The cabin rattled again. Alarms wailed. The cockpit door slammed open, revealing the pilots, motionless, their instruments flickering between analog dials and digital screens. The altitude gauge spun erratically. Daniel felt it in his bones, and the plane wasn't flying anymore. It was falling. He stumbled into the cockpit, gripping the co-pilot's seat. "Come on," he shouted, slamming switches, but the controls didn't respond. The radio hissed with static. He pressed the intercom button anyway, voice breaking. "If anyone can hear me, please listen." The cabin behind him was filled with faint light, ghostly figures glowing in the dark. "I know what this is," Daniel said, breathing hard. "You're not trapped. You don't have to relive this. Whatever happened before, it's over. You're forgiven. You're free." For a long, trembling second, nothing happened. Then the boy's voice. "Can we go home now?" Daniel closed his eyes. "Yes, go home." A soft wind moved through the cabin, a sound like 1,000 sighs released at once. The light grew brighter, filling every corner, washing away the darkness and the screams. The storm outside faded to calm. The engines roared back to life. The plane leveled. When Daniel turned, the ghosts were gone. Only empty seats remained, and a single teddy bear resting gently on the aisle floor. He sank into the co-pilot's chair, tears slipping down his face, whispering, "You're home now." Outside, dawn began to rise through the clouds. The storm had broken apart into a soft gray sky. Morning light spilled across the endless clouds like melted gold, painting the cabin in a strange, almost holy glow. For the first time since takeoff, there was no turbulence, no screams, no flickering lights, only the steady hum of the engines and the rhythmic beeping of a now stabilized control panel. Daniel sat in the co-pilot's chair, shaking, drenched in sweat. His hands were still gripping the yoke, though the autopilot had long since re-engaged itself. The digital display blinked with coordinates that made no sense. No flight path, no altitude reading, only static. He exhaled, his voice trembling. "Is anyone alive back there?" Silence. Daniel stood slowly, pushing through the aisle. The cabin was eerily calm now. Seatbelts hanging loose, food trays still open, coffee cups half full. Every seat looked recently occupied, but there were no passengers. Only a faint warmth in the air, like people had just been there a few seconds ago. As he moved down the aisle, something caught his eye. Seat 17A. The photograph lay neatly on the cushion. The woman's face smiled back at him, holding her son close. The same photo she had shown him before takeoff. Daniel swallowed hard, picking it up. For a second, the faint reflection of both of them shimmered across the glass window beside the seat. Mother and child, then faded like mist. A crackle broke the silence. The radio. He hurried to the cockpit. "Flight 237, do you copy? We lost contact with you for nearly an hour." Daniel froze. He pressed the button, voice hoarse. "This is Daniel Reed. I don't understand what happened. We hit a storm. Systems failed, but we're still in the air." The controller's voice trembled. Flight 237. Are you saying you're still airborne? Because there was a pause. We already found your wreckage. 30 years ago. Daniel's blood ran cold. What? Static swallowed the rest. The cockpit filled with sunlight as the clouds began to part. Below, the city of Chicago shimmered, real, alive, moving. The runway stretched like a silver ribbon beneath him. Instinct took over. He gripped the yoke, lined the plane up, and began to descend. The landing was smooth. Too smooth. The wheels touched the tarmac with a soft whisper instead of a screech. When the engines powered down, the world went completely silent again. He unbuckled his harness and stepped out into the aisle. The cabin was empty, peaceful. The air smelled faintly of ozone and lavender, like the moment after rain. At the front of the plane, the cockpit door swung open on its own. A faint breeze carried a whisper through it. Thank you. Daniel turned slowly toward the sound. For a brief instant he saw them. Dozens of faint, glowing silhouettes filling the cabin. Passengers smiling, some holding hands, others pressing their palms against the glass as if saying goodbye. At the center stood the woman from seat 17A, holding her son's hand. She smiled at Daniel one last time, whispering something he could barely hear. You brought us home. Then they were gone. A blinding flash of white filled the cabin. Daniel covered his eyes, and when he looked again, he was standing on the empty runway, the aircraft dissolving into mist behind him. In his trembling hand, he still held the teddy bear. The horizon glowed with the first light of dawn, soft and forgiving. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, emergency crews rushing toward a plane that wasn't there anymore. Daniel looked up at the sky and whispered, "Rest easy." As he walked away, a gentle voice, the boy's, echoed faintly behind him, carried on the wind, "See you next flight." The breeze lifted, carrying the sound higher, until it vanished completely into the morning clouds.